All right. I'm going to wait just a minute as I give people a chance to jump on and join this webinar today. I am looking forward to sharing with you a bit about our messages and looking at that kind of the neuroscience side of how do we unlock that human capacity? How do we get into that untapped human capacity is kind of like the secret sauce that every organization today is really needing to look at and needing to understand better in this new era of intelligence, in this new world in which we're living in and the challenges that people are facing today. So while we give this a minute just for people to jump on, I want you to just if you can throw in the chat. I know I'm live streaming to multiple platforms, so I may not see all of the comments, but I will see some of them. What are some of your top challenges? What are some of the top challenges either you or your team or your organization are facing right now? What are some of those things that are impacting your work, your world of work, and the experiences that you're having? So again, just I'm going to wait another minute or two for people to jump on. Go ahead and throw those in the chat. And once again, since I am live streaming to multiple platforms, I may not see all of the comments in the chat, but I do want to give everybody a chance to participate, get engaged. Again, if we think about all of this from a neuroscience perspective, which is kind of what we do and what I like to focus on, we want to be always engaging in as much as we can with the materials that we're learning. That's going to help create those neural pathways. All right, I'm going to get going in just a minute. I'm just going to give it another minute. What are your top challenges that you, your organization, your team are facing right now? So, one of the things that you may or may not be aware of is that we've entered kind of a new era of work, that we've entered this new era of intelligence. And for a long time, we have been kind of in this information era where we had this explosion after the internet and the broader access to computers came out, where we've been really focused on information and data and how to use that data. And since about the 2020s, the early 2020s, we've now moved into this intelligence era, which is no surprise. We've all been hit with AI based technologies and how we're going to use them and how we're going to apply them. And it's really created a shift in what workplaces and people in workplaces are having to focus on. And so workplaces today are really having to address how they're going to use technology and AI to improve or focus on productivity, efficiency, and effectiveness, how they're going to allocate work between what humans do and what they use AI or artificial intelligence technology to do in their workplaces or in their processes and systems. They're also having to adapt more quickly to these technologies, including AI, putting them in place more quickly, adding new things that are available to create that productivity, efficiency, and effectiveness. And as a result, change their systems, their strategies, and structures, change their processes and how they're getting things done and how they're going to market and how they're working with their clients. And so all of these are kind of at top of mind, I think, in many leaders' strategic plans and what they're focused on. And at the same time, we've seen a journey to overwhelm for many leaders in the workplace. And what we've seen is this kind of common story of leaders experiencing this pathway to overwhelm. And so what happens is typically we take the strongest performers in our workplaces, we take the people that are able to deliver the best results, and then we promote them to positions of leadership. And they're so talented and they're so great that we decide we're going to give them more to do because they are also the strongest performers. So even though they're leading teams, we're still giving them the most critical projects. They are still owning the most key customer or sales initiatives. They are still responsible for delivering and producing as well as leading their teams. And because they're delivering more and more, over time they develop they have so much that they're trying to do that they have no time to really be developing other people. And so we're investing all this money in our leadership in the top and middle of leadership, and the expectation is that by developing those leaders and those managers to impact everyone's performance, that that's going to lead to better results. But if those leaders are overloaded with their work responsibilities, then that is going to have a trickle down impact to the people that are working for them or that are part of their teams. Because what happens is as these leaders become overwhelmed, they don't have time to develop their people. They don't have time to develop them into the same level of high performance that they themselves are capable of delivering. And so then that leads to less communication, unclear expectations, fewer updates as priorities are constantly changing. It makes it more difficult for those leaders to communicate and clarify that something's changed and we need to shift or make a change in priorities. It then also impacts those leaders and managers' ability to really understand the performance of their people. How are they doing? What are they doing? What are they focused on? And that makes it more difficult for them to really give unbiased and useful feedback if they're not able to really be engaging with their people on a regular basis and understanding how it is that they're performing, which has led to a lot of the getting people back into the workplaces versus working virtually, because there's no time or ability to really understand how people are doing if I can't easily see them or if I can't easily see what they're delivering. And then that leads to, when it comes to performance practices, a lot of checking boxes and just filling in forms, not actually really caring about or not actually really being able to develop the performance of your people. And so ultimately it leads to this kind of cascading impact of challenges in our workplaces. And maybe some of these sound familiar to what you've experienced in your workplaces. There's new and increasing expectations, customer demands keep going up, we keep increasing our goals and our financial targets. There's new technologies including AI. We've got new security requirements, especially in the cybersecurity area. And there's this focus on ESG expectations. And then that is impacted by people's personal challenges. So people have higher levels of stress and burnout, mental health challenges. There's a huge challenge with family and childcare issues, which leads to frequent illness, overwhelm, frustration. There's this impact on people personally. And then that impacts their performance in the workplace. So, this is where we see disengagement, changes in mood, missed deadlines, more errors, reduced social interaction, longer hours. All of those things are impacting people's performance in the workplace. And then that has a trickle down or impact to the overall organization, where you experience that decreased engagement, more turnover, difficulty finding and developing talent. You have a need for new skills and capabilities. And then there's just more conflict and challenges within and between people because of all of these compounding pressures, because of this kind of perfect storm of increasing demands, the impact it's having on people's bodies, and the resulting effect of this is that the world is actually changing faster than people can adapt. And so, in this new intelligence era, the world is changing so fast that many people are struggling to adapt or evolve fast enough to keep up. And if people aren't keeping up, then that's going to impact our workplace practices. That's going to make it difficult for our workplace practices to keep up as well. And so we can see these effects in what we just talked about and in some of the statistics that we're seeing in our world and in our environment with the impact on our mental health. 7 out of 10 people are struggling with mental health. 1 in 3 Americans feel lonely every week. 37% rate mental health as fair or poor. 49% are frequently stressed. We know that this is an issue, and it's compounded by the stress and burnout, the level of stress of parents. There was just the Surgeon General's report in the US talking about the level of stress of parents today. And in our workplaces, a 60% report experiencing significant stress. And that leads to those workplace issues of people struggling to adapt, to get the new skills that they need, to get the growth that they need in order to perform. The turnover of those top performers is at 47%. And all of this is impacting our society and people overall. And we know if this is impacting individuals, then our workplace practices are also not going to keep up. And so if you think about this from a workplace standpoint, and let's look at performance management. Performance management, only 2% of chief human resource officers think that their performance management system works. And despite this, 71% of companies are still continuing to use the formal review process, even though we know it doesn't work. Leadership development, 30% of leaders feel that the leadership programs have actually prepared them. Only 30% feel that they're prepared for the challenges they're facing today. And 80% of companies report that they have a leadership development gap, while 84% are concerned that they're even going to be able to fill it, that they're going to be able to address it in the next 5 years. When it comes to change and digital transformation, while 90% of companies are investing in it, only 45% of employees feel that those tools are actually having a positive impact, that they're actually making their work easier. And 74% of leaders say that they're involving employees in this process, but only 42% of employees actually feel included. Work life balance, well being has been a huge issue, but despite focus on it, 67% of people are still feeling the pressure to be always on. And diversity, equity, inclusion, which has been a huge focus in recent years as well. There's a huge gap between organizations believing that they've made an impact and only 25% of people really feeling like their workplace is truly inclusive. And so what we're seeing is that the deficit or the debt keeps increasing. The longer we wait to address that, the fact that humans are not adapting at the rate at which our world is changing, at the rate at which we're needing to adopt and implement new technologies, the bigger that gap gets and the harder it's going to get to reduce it, to solve it, to mitigate against it. So before I get into this, the why and the solution of this, I just want to tell you a little bit about me in case you don't know who I am. So, the first thing to know about me is that I'm not a neuroscientist or a researcher. I'm a practitioner. I was an executive leader for 15 years. I worked in the corporate workplace as a leader over legal, HR, talent management, customer service, project coordination, order management, IT, a lot of the operations functions. And so my interest in this space is really around practical application. How can we use things as leaders to make us more effective? How can we help people? And I didn't originally get focused and certified on these neuroscience based approaches that we're going to talk about today and in the workshops over the next 3 days for business purposes. I really did it for myself because I had gone through a burnout experience a number of years ago where I experienced this disconnect between being able to achieve the things that I wanted to achieve and being successful and doing all of the best practices that everyone said you needed to do from a performance and talent management perspective, and yet still seeing the negative impacts or consequences of those best practices. And I wanted to understand how to do things differently, how to live my life differently. And not just for myself, but also and especially for my children, which is why I have them in this picture. Because the world is changing so fast, and we've created this amazing world with so much technology, but children are really struggling. And if I couldn't figure out how to adapt and how to close that gap for myself, how could I guide, nurture, and grow my children to navigate all of those challenges in the world, to be able to overcome the issues and the struggles that they are experiencing as they're growing and trying to adapt to the world that we've created? And what I discovered was this new way of being and this new approach that rewires and optimizes people to be able to perform at peak performance and be able to perform in a way that is different from what we've thought before. And I discovered the power of this neuroscience based approach. And I really could not believe that I hadn't learned it before. Through all my years of school, in law school, in graduate school, I had never learned these techniques and these approaches before, and I was shocked that it wasn't already a being used in a widespread approach in workplaces. And I recognized that there was a need by leaders for this, but there was really a need for by everyone, that everyone needs these strategies to be able to close that gap, to be able to adapt to this changing world that we're living in and that we're experiencing. And see, like I said, when I was at my peak, when I thought I was at the top of my game as an executive leader, winning awards, achieving results, getting all of these massive accomplishments, and hitting all of those achievements that I had been working towards for the first decade and a half of my career, was when I experienced the burnout, was when everything kind of came toppling in. And I wanted to figure out why. Why did I go from such a high state, from doing everything everyone said that we should do as top performing leaders, to such a burned out, struggling state, and where it took me years to get my performance back up, where it took me years to address the damage that I had done as a result of those practices. And so that's what took me on this journey to try to figure out, why is it that workplaces and people aren't adapting? Why is it that we aren't changing at the rate that we need to be changing? And what I discovered is that even if you do everything right as an organization and as an individual, our bodies as human beings, they're wired to reject change on a biological level. And deep down, we really know this because we've created a $2 billion change management industry. And despite all of that investment, we know that 70% of all change initiatives fail, and that 71% of employees report feeling overwhelmed by the amount of change. We know that change is a challenge. We talk about it all the time, and we invest lots of money in trying to manage people through change and trying to get people to push themselves through, or to communicate them through the change processes that exist out there. So this led me to ask, okay, so what is the human body's primary objective? What is it that the human body is most interested in trying to accomplish? And what I discovered is the human body's primary objective is really survival. It is survival. It is surviving in spite of everything that it experiences. And there's really two things that are critical to the human body's survival, to achieving that outcome. And the first is sufficient resources. And so this is things like food, shelter, companionship. It is meeting the needs of the human body. So that's the first element of human survival. And then the second isn't really a surprise. It's to avoid predators and threats to safety. So, what are the things that could prevent or hinder us from continuing forward as humans? Now, you might be thinking, okay, most of these needs are met most of the time. In most places there we have access to food, we have shelter, we have communities or relationships. We aren't running tigers or saber-toothed tigers anymore. We don't have those same predators that we had in our not too distant past as humans. So, what are some of those modern day resource issues or modern day pr- predators or threats to safety? Well, when you think about this, some of our modern day resource issues are not having enough time, not enough sleep. We don't have access to the healthy foods or the time to cook and make those healthy foods. Mental health are challenges represent some of those modern day resource issues. And when it comes to the modern day predators and threats, we've got a kind of a whole new realm of challenges with natural disasters, pandemics, weather events. We have public security threats like school shootings or workplace shootings, domestic violence, high stress deadlines, hostile work environments, job insecurity, workplace conflict, overwork and burnout, performance reviews. These are some of the more modern day threats to safety that trigger that same stress response in the human body in order to survive. So this takes me to wanting to give you just a little bit of kind of the neuroscience background. So for those that aren't familiar with how the human body works from a neuroscience perspective, here's just a little bit. So there's neurons, that's kind of the image in the center of that slide, that are the cells that communicate and tell the body everything that it's supposed to do. It tells them when you want to lift an arm, there's neural connections that are being sent through my body telling it to lift my hand in this way. It's also telling me when to breathe, my heart to beat, my food to digest. Those neurons are connecting and formed throughout the body, telling my body what to do. And those connections get formed throughout our lives and create these neural pathways. And the more that we repeat that neural pathway or that pattern, the stronger that pathway becomes. And then those form these neural networks that are responsible for all virtually everything we do as a human being. Now, when it comes to our human evolution and growth, we are programmed to always be growing and expanding in response to two things: our environment and our experiences. So, as we're growing throughout our lives, our bodies form these neural connections and pathways based upon our experiences and our environment. Now, our environment means our cultures, our family dynamics, what we're exposed to, what we see, what we experience in our cultures and in our communities. And then our experiences are what's happened to us throughout our lives, and then how our bodies react and respond to those experiences. And every single person is unique, and every single person has a unique set of experiences and environments, and how their body reacts and responds to those. So even when you have two siblings, and I'm a twin mom, so I have two twin 5-year-old girls, and I know this firsthand. You can have two siblings who are growing up in the same home at the same time in the same environment, but they respond and react differently to those experiences and those environments. And it creates their ways of being, and that's their ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving. And we all have these patterns, these ways of being, our natural state of thinking, feeling, and behaving. And depending upon those experiences and our environment, we develop different ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving, these different patterns in which we operate in the world. So what do you think the body prioritizes to ensure it has sufficient resources? So when you're thinking about those two elements and having those sufficient resources, what do you think the body prioritizes to ensure it has sufficient resources? And the number one thing that the body does is conserve energy. Conserving energy is the top priority of the body and the brain and our neural connection. So the more that it can repeat those patterns in order to conserve energy, the more that it will. And because our brains use a ton of energy, our brains use 20% of the body's energy, even though it's only 5% of its overall size. Our bodies want to reduce the amount of work our brains have to do. So, if it can use a pattern, if it can fill in gaps, if it can reduce the amount of energy our brain is having to consume to do something, it will do that, which is why 95% of our daily processes are either subconscious or unconscious. Think about that for a second. That means only 5% of everything our body is doing every day is consciously chosen, is a conscious choice to engage in a particular way. And so, what the brain is really doing here is it's using those neural pathways, it's using all that information that it's taken in before to create those ways of being in order to conserve resources, in order to focus on the information that it needs and to filter out the information that it doesn't. And so what it's doing is it's choosing to filter out any non-essential information or stimuli. And so it's always going to prioritize and choose what's going to help it survive. It's going to prioritize and choose what gives it rewards. So anything that's going to release dopamine, it prioritizes based on all those past experiences and learned patterns. And then it's going to strengthen the neural pathways that it keeps using while it's eliminating or cleaning out the ones that it isn't using as frequently, which is why we create these ways in which we interpret information and see the world. And I have that picture there on the slide of the brain, because one of the ways that we do this, and one of the most a really great way to kind of understand this is even our eyesight. And as we interpret and see, as we interpret or see what's coming into us, our brain is making sense of what we're seeing before our eyes have fully processed the visual data. And so if you think of like a person playing baseball and swinging at the ball, the eye can't process faster than the ball is coming at the person. The eye isn't able to actually process the data all the way up until that moment. And so instead, the brain, based upon all the experiences that that baseball player has in hitting that ball, the brain, they develop the patterns to interpret that the initial visual cues coming in order to swing the bat and hit the ball. And so this happens all the time, in which our brain is making guesses or assumptions about what we're seeing or what we're experiencing based upon all those patterns, and filtering out sometimes data that may give us a different interpretation or may help us understand things differently. And the reason why this is important is because when our brains are doing this, when our brains are focused and our bodies and these neural networks are focused on using what's already there, we can find ourselves stuck in some of these patterns. We can find ourselves stuck being resistant to change, resistant to new ways of doing things, not necessarily seeing all the important information or perspective that's in front of us, because our brains are and our bodies are wired in this way to narrow our focus in order to conserve this energy. So, on the other side, what happens when we experience stress and we think about those predators and those threats to our safety? Well, if one of the primary purposes is to keep us alive, our bodies are going to send us messages to resist things that might cause us pain or might harm us. And so one way to think about what happens is when we're living our lives, moving throughout our lives, our bodies are unconsciously reacting to all of those environments and experiences that we're having. And when our bodies interpret something that is a threat, something that triggers a stress response in our body's going to go into a fight, flight, or freeze state. And so if you look at that chart on the left side of the slide, at the top is what we call sympathetic, or that's a fight, flight state. And I put a lion there because let's think about it as like outrunning the lion, outrunning the predator that's after you. And so sometimes our bodies will go into a fight flight state where we're in that high energy, stressed out state. Alternatively, at the bottom, we may go into a freeze state or a dorsal vagal state. And I put a lizard there, or you can think about a lizard or a cat, a mouse that's in a cat's mouth sometimes, where they go limp, where they play dead, where they freeze in order to avoid a predator, or in the case of the mouse, to hope that the cat puts them down and then they can run away. So the body's response is to freeze or go into that dorsal vagal freeze state in order to survive that stressful event. Meanwhile, in the middle is kind of that most balanced rest and digest kind of state. And you think about that as just, relaxed and having fun and joyful and just in that calm, coherent, balance state. And so throughout our lives, in response to the stress we experience at work or in our lives or with our families, our bodies are constantly reacting unconsciously to all those experiences, going into those different states. And what happens if we're not aware of this is that if we don't expend that stress, if we don't move that stress out of the body, it starts to build up. So for example, if I'm in a stress state because I'm outrunning a predator, I'm either going to run away or fight off that predator, which is going to move that stress out of the body. And if we don't do that, what happens over time is that stress builds up in our bodies. And this is what I discovered was really happening to me in my burnout experience, or over the years leading up to burnout, where there was one chronic stressful event after another, where we went through a corporate acquisition and merger, where we did a downsizing, where I got pregnant with twins and had twins, where we went through a pandemic, we went through a ransomware attack. All these stressful events were happening over time. And each time my stress baseline was going up, was being increased, because I wasn't bringing myself back to a balanced state, because I wasn't going through a stress recovery. So, one way to think about this is like, imagine if each time you have a stressful event or you experience stress, you get a pebble. And over time, those pebbles become big rocks. And then they keep getting bigger until you're literally carrying around these boulders of stress in your body because you haven't moved them through. And most of the time, our jobs don't allow for those opportunities. We're sitting at desks, we're working on computers, we're not necessarily engaging in the activities that would move stress out of our bodies. And so what happens is, with all this stress built up in our body, is it prevents people, and it prevents us as humans from being able to adapt and evolve, from having that adaptability and that ability to evolve in response to our environments. And so that stress that results from all that change and disruption that we're experiencing reduces people's willingness to adapt their behaviors. And the more that we pressure people to change faster, without, especially if we don't have the support and the communication and the resources there, it compounds that stress, that uncertainty, and the negative impact, which is going to further increase their resistance and the risk of failure. And this is what is called the change resistance cycle. So the more change, the more stress, the more those events are happening, the more that stress builds up. So if you think about going into the 2020, 2021, 2022, how many stressful incidences we were faced with, and how many stressful events were occurring one after another, on top of needing to adapt to the technological changes and the changes in our workplace and our jobs that we were experiencing. It was having a huge impact. And we know that change affected employees are reporting today experiencing moderate to high levels of stress. 73% of people are experiencing this high level of stress. And 83% of people report that they're suffering from change fatigue because they haven't gotten the resources that they need to help them adapt. They haven't gotten the types of support that they need to be able to adapt to that change. And so you can see there some of the common effects of that change fatigue on looking for a new job, being tired and stressed, enjoying your job, trusting your employer, productivity. It's this constantly downward cascading cycle of negative impacts that actually impacts people who are already struggling to adapt and makes the situation worse, makes it even harder for people to adapt. And similarly to the way that people develop certain ways of being, that those experiences and environments create people's ways of being, those thinking, feeling, and behaving. We also develop certain ways of working and living. And if you think about your workplace or your family or your community, there's certain ways in which things get done. Decisions get made, problems get solved, the way people communicate, the way they collaborate, the way direction is set, the way um, uh, the the work gets executed. All of those things are creating these ways of working within the workplace. And just like individuals use the patterns that already exist, just like humans and the bodies and brains like to use the same ways of being to create that efficiency to conserve those resources. Similarly, our workplaces create these patterns or ways of working. And in order to increase and maintain productivity and efficiency, which is usually top priority of organizations, we support and reinforce the patterns, the ways of working. We want to keep things going the same way that they've been going, which is what leads to outdated approaches and systems. I think this is a big contributing factor as to why so many organizations haven't updated their performance management or performance review approach and system. It takes too much time and too much effort to change, so we keep using the same practices, even though we really do know that they're not working or they're not having the effect that we want or hope that they would have. It also leads to burnout and exhaustion. So this emphasis on productivity and not allowing people the flexibility to really manage themselves and manage their time and make good decisions creates this burnout and exhaustion, which we've seen heavily in industries like healthcare and technologies, where people are expected to perform at these really peak high performing levels for really extended periods of time. And then that has an impact on creativity and innovation. When people are expected to follow these patterns and keep repeating the practices as they exist with established processes and ways of working, it prevents that creativity and that innovation and the ideas. And so it actually inhibits people from being more adaptable and being more able to adapt and grow in response to their environments, because they've become more patterned in these practices and these processes that they've continued to follow for longer periods of time. And this leads to disengagement and poor well-being. It impacts people's feelings and sense of autonomy and ability to make good decisions and enjoy their work, because they're so focused on just producing rather than on really making an impact or seeing the outcome of their efforts. And that impacts people's level of trust and their fear and their isolation. Those patterns can inhibit people from wanting to work together. People may become more isolated, and there's this lack of working together and organizational learning that you would want to see in an organization. And then finally, and probably most concerning, is this can lead to a sense of dehumanization, where people feel like they're just cogs in a machine. They're just another part of the corporate machine, rather than an intelligent living human being that has value to bring and resources to offer to the organization or to the workplace. And so when we have this over focus on productivity, it negates a focus on people's needs and their emotions and their well-being. It tends to overlook these very important elements to accessing and applying human intelligence in the workplace. And you see this when you see micromanagement, or even today algorithmic management, where tasks or work is allocated by a non-human or an artificial system where there's high levels of burnout, where people feel like their work is just monotonous, repetitive tasks, and where there's not that connection or relationship building in the workplace, and where they're working in really rigid, inflexible systems. And that's where you get this sense, and these people and people start to just feel dehumanized, like they don't matter, or they aren't as critical, and that has this overwhelmingly negative impact on ultimately the workplace's results. And despite this, there's this huge gap between what leaders and executives think is happening and their belief that things are moving in the right direction, whereas workers are people in the workplace feel that it's not, where they feel that it's not at that same level. And I'm curious, and we'll talk about this in some of these workshops, in the workshops over the next couple of days, how much this aligns with your experience. Do you see this gap in terms of what leaders believe, and probably rightfully so, and what individuals feel is really happening? And I say that rightfully so because if we think back to those patterns, those are going to reinforce for leaders that they're doing the right things, that the things that they're doing are having that impact, when in fact they may not be having that impact. And ultimately, the impact on people is what we kind of started with. We're seeing these impacts on individuals, on their performance, their productivity, how many hours they're working, or their absenteeism, their mood, how how willing they are to take on tasks, their need for reassurance, or resistance to feedback. All of these things are impacting the individual. And then at an organizational level, you see outdated technology, you see reduced productivity, resistance to change, poor decision making that's often rushed, difficulty finding and keeping talent, resistance to learning, decrease in creativity, innovation. All of these impacts are impacting our organization. So, what can we do to create better results? Well, kind of like we want to do maintenance on our vehicles, right? If we don't do the proper maintenance on our vehicles, then we run the risk that our engine's going to burn out, or we're going to break down, and things aren't going to work the way that they're supposed to. We need to look at how do we create these better results by doing the right things up front, by doing the right things in the first place, so we don't end up with people in this burned out, and experiencing all of these negative impacts that we just talked about. And so, what we want to do is develop work practices that create positive outcomes for people. So, addressing that stress and increasing people's ability to adapt, and positive outcomes for the workplaces and businesses, so that we're impacting both of those things rather than just one or the other with the practices that we put in place. And so, Deloitte, in a recent report this year in 2024, talked about this impact of, in this era of human performance and this intelligence era, we really want to have something that's mutually reinforcing. We want to have human outcomes and business outcomes. So things like, we want our businesses to have customer satisfaction, efficiency, growth, profitability, innovation. We want those business outcomes, but we also want the human outcomes, like equity, equitable wages, belonging, opportunity for advancement, psychological and physical safety, purpose and meaning, happiness, well-being. We want those positive impacts for humans as well. And when we combine those two, so when we take the practices that create human outcomes and the practices that create business outcomes, we get this really high human performance. We get the results that we're really after to begin with. We get the outcomes that we're really trying to achieve. And so we create this mutually reinforcing cycle with a compounding shared value for workers, organizations, and society, because when we do both those things, we get better results for everyone. So, what does this look like? Well, we think it's time for an upgrade. We think it means we've got to upgrade our work practices to support what is truly peak or high performance. So, when we think about peak or high performance, what is it? What do we mean by peak or high performance? And most of the time, when we think about peak or high performance, these are some of the things that we are actually referring to: high stress environments with time pressures, tight deadlines, a focus on productivity, being really busy, working hard, long hours, lots of sacrifice, constant multitasking, rushed deadlines decisions to meet deadlines to get things done, overcommitment and perfectionism. And then there's never time or very little time for learning and development. And I hear this all the time. We just don't have more time. There's no more time to have people get the development or the training that they need. We have to produce results. But what's really peak or high performance is cultures that are have a focus on coherence, a focus on outcomes and results. So rather than how much can I get done, uh, and how much can I process in terms of productivity, how do I get the outcome or result that I'm hoping to achieve? How do I get the sales numbers or the customer satisfaction that I want? How do we create balanced boundaries with mutual benefits? How do we use time blocking, project and goal planning? How do we put in place clear expectations with personal accountability, have wise decision making, and have that time that's dedicated to development that helps to create those neural pathways that's actually going to enhance and positively impact the performance of people? And I use the definition of peak performance in my book as peak performance is when we have evolved and optimized ourselves to operate at the highest level of our personal capabilities and in a way that produces positive results and creates exceptional experiences in our lives. And the reason I define it this way is because we want to be operating at our best, but we want to do it in a way that produces the results that we want, not just in a way that has us feeling busy or feeling like we're getting things done rather than actually producing the outcomes and results that we want in our lives. And one of the things we've seen is that organizations have done a good job of putting in place the strategies that improve business outcomes. So they've put in place leadership development. They've maybe put in place employee engagement surveys and a focus on that. And they've had some regular performance practices. And many have even put in place some strategies around having that people focused culture, focusing on psychological safety or a respectful workplace, and having those behaviors in place. But many have not also, even if they have put in those practices in place, they haven't also put in place the strategies for really improving human outcomes. And we say those are really wrapped around kind of these four pillars of peak performing people. And that is having this enhanced consciousness, so this greater self-awareness of that allows us to identify when we're in a stress state or when we have a limiting belief, when we have something that's keeping us from performing at our best. Developing the capabilities that are required for peak performance. If people aren't equipped with the skills and capabilities that they need to perform at their best, things like expectation setting, feedback, development, and accountability, they're going to struggle to deliver, to have positive outcomes. Having the level of competence that people need. So increasing their proficiency to be at mastery, to be performing at a level that makes it easy and enjoyable rather than a struggle or a challenge. And then finally, having strategies that actually expand people's capacity, helping them to really apply those neural networks to access into those neural pathways and neural networks in their bodies in order to have more capacity to get things accomplished. So one of the first steps is always kind of understanding what is your current state. How are you? How are your team? How's your organization doing today? And so this is where I like to look at those kind of 4 pillars and evaluating how where are you today? What constraints do you have on yourself and on your organization that might be impacting, some or all of these different pillars? And so capabilities are those skills, knowledge, and behaviors. What are those things that allow people that are indicative of what you can do, that you're able to accomplish? Capacity is what you're currently feasibly able to do. And so this gets into how much can you accomplish? How much can you do right now given the constraints, given your current state? Your competence is your overall level of proficiency, what's currently possible, feasible, and exceptional that you can perform at your very best. And then your consciousness is that awareness of your current state. What's going on in your performance journey? What are the things that are getting in your way or that you have to navigate in terms of your performance? And so I would encourage you to do this assessment for yourself and your team. We have an individual assessment and an organizational assessment. We'll include the link in the chat here for you as well, as you can snap these QR codes quickly to look at, do you have what you need for yourself and your organization? Are you aware of the constraints that you have? Do you have the capabilities, those skills, knowledge, and behaviors you need to achieve your goals? Do you have the level of competence, this experience and proficiency that you need for success? Do you have the capacity to successfully reach your goals? Understanding those levels in your current state is kind of that foundational first step. Now, the next step after you understand kind of where are you is, where do you start? Where do we start developing the work practices that create these positive outcomes for people and workplaces, our businesses? And this is where we get into what are what we kind of describe as a chicken and an egg challenge. Which came first? This creates this challenge where we know human evolution and growth is directly impacted by the environment, the culture we live in, and the experiences that we're having. Meanwhile, our human decisions, our ways of being, thinking, feeling, and behaving are directly impacting our cultures, the environments that we live in, and the experiences that we're having. And so this creates a little bit of a chicken and an egg. Where do we start? Where do we focus? And but what happens is, if we try to pick one, if we choose between changing culture or people, when the other goes back into our gets exposed to the other, it has a negative impact. So for the example, if people go get therapy or they work on themselves and they get coaching, but then they return to the same family or workplace environment that's hurting or hindering their progress, that's impacting their ability to show up in a certain way, they're going to regress in their evolution. They're not going to be able to sustain those changes. And so one way to think about this is, we have to be doing both. We're either progressing like that never-ending staircase in the top right of the slide. They're always directly impacting each other. So they're either going to be positively impacting each other, or they're going to be negatively impacting each other. And so we have to look at, how do we evolve our humans, our ways of being as individuals, and our ways of working and living in our cultures and in our environments. And so there's kind of areas, or different types of focus we can do. We can look at an individual level. How are we evolving and transforming our own ways of being, thinking, feeling, and behaving, which creates results on our how we access and get in touch with our inner intelligences. This relates to our decision making and problem solving, our emotional intelligence, relationships, passion, how we communicate and interact with others, our motivation and action taking, as well as our intuition. And so this is really impacting our overall performance, engagement, energy, and well-being as individuals. How do we get into and better use and understand those? Then we can do it at a group level. So this transforms a team's ways of working. So impacting how they execute, their efficiency, quality, communication, how cohesive they are, how they collaborate, how they connect and belong, how they adapt and are accountable. And then finally we can do it at an organizational level. And when we're doing all three and at this organizational level, we're really transforming the culture and we're looking at those outcomes, experiences and engagement, performance, productivity, clarity, alignment, ownership, resilience, innovation, agility, where we're looking at those long-term impacts on the culture. When we're doing all three of these is where we're going to get the biggest benefit. So, one of the ways that we can help in getting started is thinking of us as your driving instructor, as somebody who's going to provide support and guidance as you learn to evolve yourself and your culture to create better outcomes. And we've created what we call a performance partnering approach. So, how do people come together to support one another's performance in a collaborative and reciprocal relationship? How do we bring people together in this way and develop them to be able to support one another in their performance? And so in order to do this, in order to create this change in ways of working together, we we created an approach to help create the transformation that we need in order to get to that outcome or to get to that result. And we use the transformational growth model. So it starts with knowing what you need to know, knowing it and understanding it, understanding why it's important, feeling that it's important and believing in it, knowing how to do it and then actually doing it. Now, most programs stop at this point. Most programs teach you the knowledge, the information, how what it is you're supposed to do. We go a step further in looking at who's doing it, so the specific person on the journey, until you're not just becoming it but you're being it, and that's the result. That's the transformed outcome, where rather than having to consciously think about performing in a certain way or adapting to change in a particular way, it is just part of your ways of being. It's one of those patterns of how you respond automatically in the situation and circumstances that you're in a way that positively impacts yourself and your outcomes. And we look at this as creating both embodied transformation in the individual. So that's that profound change that occurs and is really integrated into a person's body, behaviors, and ways of being. So it's really changing them and those patterns that are embedded in those neural pathways. And similarly, a cultural transformation that's really fundamentally changing an organization's culture, its values, beliefs, behaviors, and ways of working. So it's creating that transformation that allows it to be sustainable and create those long term results that you want as an organization. So, how do we do this? So, in order to create lasting, embodied, and cultural transformation, we think there's kind of three key steps. The first is accessing, and this is all about identifying and understanding the insights from your human intelligences, those neural networks we talked about earlier. Getting in touch with those different neural networks so that you can identify all and use all of your human intelligence. So this is the knowledge and understanding of key concepts. This is the values, emotions, and connection that's required for conscious growth, and the actions and behaviors that are required to then put it into practice with experience. So get into the doing of those particular behaviors. Then we have to align them. So, one of the challenges that comes up when it comes to human intelligence is those patterns that we've gotten used to, those ways of being that have become familiar. And so we have to look at how do we realign those? How do we rewire those? So how do we integrate that thinking, feeling, and behaving, those ways of being? How do we integrate them together? How do we identify where there might be a past pattern or something that is hindering our performance and preventing integration, transformation, and growth, something that's getting in the way? And then how do we rewire and eliminate those constraints on our people's performance by by updating individual collective understanding, beliefs, and behaviors? So then how do we use all of that individual and collective intelligences of all of our people together? So using all of that intelligence in order to then apply it. So then we're going to take we're going to we're going to take this we're going to take this approach and we're going to apply it and use it in our work and lives. We're going to use it to help us make better decisions and improve our relationships and problem solving. We're going to use it to shift our structures, our systems, our strategies in our workplaces, our cultures, in order to create better outcomes, in order to positively impact people's performance. And we're going to transform our cultures in a way that creates positive outcomes. And so our solutions are actually applicable to both positively impacting our work and our family cultures so that we can align them for that positive transformation or the positive outcome. And as a result of all of that, we get the embodied and cultural transformation where we've rewired those patterns, or we're helping people to not just upgrade but continuously evolve their ways of working, living, being, thinking, feeling, and behaving, where we're constantly transforming. Now, this may sound like a lot of different steps or some new and unfamiliar terms. And that's true, which is why we've set up workshops over the next 3 days for you to be able to go deeper into each of these elements and see how you can apply them. And so the real question you just have to ask yourself is, do you have the courage? And courage is defined as the ability to confront fear, pain, danger, uncertainty, or intimidation. It involves taking action despite feelings of apprehension or risk. So do you have the courage to dive in and see what you might be able to do with this new approach? What you might be able to transform in yourself, your team, or your organization? And so I encourage you to join our journey to embodied transformation, to get to really experience for yourself each of these 3 steps. So the first workshop is going to be all about accessing. So learning to bring awareness to your intelligences, to those neural networks in your body, and identify insights. And this may be new. This is likely a new approach you haven't seen before to how to communicate with and get in touch with those neural networks. Then on the second day, we're going to focus on how do we align them. So, how do we discover how to integrate our ways of being, living, and working? How do we understand what are those things that might be blocking us? How do we eliminate and rewire our neural pathways so that then we can ultimately apply that intelligence, which will be the third day, to our wisdom, that intelligence and wisdom to our work and lives? How can we put that in practice, not just in our relationships in the workplace, but in our relationships with our children and our family and our spouses as well? And so I encourage you to register. If you register, you will get access to the recordings. We will email out the recordings so that you can watch the recordings, even if you can't join us live for each of the workshops. If you can join us live, I encourage you to do so. We will be doing some activities, and we will be actually talking and communicating and working together over a Zoom call, diving into each of these 3 topics so that you can learn how to do them for yourself and see how valuable and impactful they can be. So I hope that today was informative and valuable to you. And I look forward to seeing you in our workshops in the coming days. We will include the link to the workshops, as well as the link to the assessments in the notes on this webinar and the comments on this webinar, so that you can grab that. I encourage you to do the assessment before you come to the workshops. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. As I always like to say whenever I end any type of webinar or workshop or talk that I'm doing, always keep evolving, keep growing, keep looking for those opportunities to rewire your neural networks so you can live your best life, your most exceptional life. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I look forward to hopefully seeing many of you in the next few days in our workshops.